I don't think it'll come as any surprise to anybody out there that I think carrying a firearm for self-defense is a basic right of every of-age legal citizen in this country. If that does surprise you, then you should probably try watching my videos with the sound on for a change. That might make it harder to masturbate to the videos, but at least you'll know what I'm actually talking about and where I'm coming from. Now, that being said, with every right comes responsibilities. And I think the number one responsibility of people who choose to carry a handgun for self-defense is that they reduce the risk to themselves and every other bystander while they're carrying that firearm. And I think there's things you can do to reduce risk. Mitigating risk is like the number one thing when it comes to carrying a gun. Now, I know a lot of people like to say, well, handguns are inanimate objects. They can't make mistakes and they're not dangerous on their own. And that's true. But you have to remember, when you choose to carry one, that inanimate object, which has great potential for harm, is being operated by a very fallible organism, you and me. So we have to, like I said, take steps to mitigate the risk presented to ourselves and the public from stupid monkeys like ourselves walking around with firearms. So I thought I'd make a list today of what I think are the top 5 things a person needs to do to mitigate risk while carrying a firearm for self-defense. Number 1 is training. Now, don't freak out. I'm not saying you got to go to a trainer and take a class on how to rapid fire while doing backflips and, all that stuff. All I'm saying is you have to be familiar with your firearm. You have to be competent with that gun. You have to know how it works and how to operate it safely and how not to make mistakes. That doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes, but it means you have to train yourself as much as possible within reason to know how to use that firearm. Just practice with it. Know what to do and what not to do. That's one of the main things about having a firearm on your person is that you understand that gun, you're familiar with that gun, and you know, like I said, what you can do with it and what you shouldn't do with it. That's the number one thing, in my opinion, to mitigate risk while carrying a firearm. Number 2 is properly maintaining your firearm. Anytime you use a tool, you should take care of that tool and make sure that tool is in proper operating condition. Keep your gun clean. Keep it properly oiled. Keep it free of debris that might cause an issue. If you've got stuff gunked up in the barrel of your gun, you might have an issue with that gun. If something gunks up in the mechanics of your semi-automatic that makes a sear not work properly or a hammer not work properly, you might have a problem when you need that gun. So just make sure it's taken care of properly. And don't do any crazy gunsmithing stuff to it that's going to make the gun unsafe, like damaging a sear or damaging a safety mechanism. You might not think that's a big problem, but talk to pretty much any gunsmith about some back alley gunsmithing they've seen done to guns and how unsafe those guns were now. So if you do mess with your gun, make sure you know what you're doing, and otherwise keep your gun in good, clean, working condition. And that's a great thing you can do. That's a big step in making sure that that gun is as safe as possible. Number 3 is carry manner, how you carry that gun. Certain ways of carrying a gun come with certain risks. Some risks I think are too great to take. Now, I like shoulder holsters, but I won't carry one because when I put my hand on that gun, it's pointing at somebody else. When this fallible organism actually puts its paw on that gun is pointing at somebody behind me. So I don't think that is a risk I'm willing to take. Also, if I wanted to cross draw, I like cross draw, but when I'm drawing cross draw, I have to realize that during a normal drawing procedure, during the normal mechanical movements of drawing cross draw, I'm liable to flag the inside of my own arm and any family member or friend that happens to be standing next to me. So I don't consider that risk acceptable because carrying is all about reducing risk as much as possible, mitigating that risk. That's a risk I don't have to take. Now, if I have some sort of disability that means I have to take that risk, well, then I'll take the risk because it's better than not carrying at all. But I'm going to take extra precautions to make sure that I train myself to do everything I can to not have a problem. But like I said, we're fallible. Anytime we place our hand on a gun, we run a risk of doing something wrong. So we should make sure that we carry in a manner that that's not a problem. So if you're carrying appendix, understand that's a potential problem. If you're cross drawing, understand that's a potential problem. Now, things like appendix carry, that risk is mostly to you, not to anybody else. So if you decide to take that extra risk, it's on you. But the good rule of thumb is at no time when you're drawing your gun should it be pointing at anything but the ground and the person you're wanting to shoot. So if your carry manner doesn't allow you to do that, if you ever have to touch your gun with your hand, draw it, reholster it, whatever, while that gun barrel is pointing at something you don't want to kill or destroy, then you're probably taking a risk you don't need to take. So carry method and carrying in a way that you don't take those risks is a very important factor when it comes to carrying as safely as possible. At number 4 is gear, which usually means your holster. Choosing the right holster for your gun is as important as choosing the right gun. You don't want to carry a gun in something that isn't proper for that gun. I've seen people carrying a $1,000 gun in a $15 nylon holster. That's not a good idea. You need to get a holster that is proper for your gun. It not only holds it properly, but it reduces risks of things like material getting in the trigger guard or the gun accidentally discharging if it hooks on a piece of the leather. You want to have the holster made in a way that it reduces as much risk as possible. Part of that risk is the holster not being able to hold the gun at all. If you're running down the street and your holster allows your gun to pop out, well, you might by instinct try to grab that gun, it might go off. You've put yourself in a dangerous situation because your holster is not adequate. Your gear is not adequate. I saw a story a few years ago of a guy carrying a Glock appendix carry in a nylon holster. There were two problems with that. One, the holster itself couldn't hold the gun, and when he tried to put the gun back in the holster, he tried to reach down and shove it back in. As it came out, the holster itself hit the trigger and caused the gun to go off while it was pointed at his leg. He was shot in the femoral artery. He lost his leg. He almost died because his holster was not proper for his gun. So when you're choosing your gear, it's almost as important as choosing the right gun. So make sure what you place your gun in, and that's where it's going to be most of the time you're carrying, is in the holster. Make sure that holster is made for that gun. It holds the gun securely. It doesn't add any risk to carrying by having loose pieces of fabric or too much coverage of certain areas of the gun. Just make sure the holster is made in a responsible way for that gun. It does its job right, and you've gone a long way towards reducing the risk of carrying a handgun. At number 5 is likely the most important part of carrying a gun safely, and that is avoiding conflict. If you're carrying a firearm, that means you have the ability to easily inflict deadly force on somebody else. So you always want to be the good guy. You want to always make good decisions. Manhood and ego don't come into it. If you're walking down the street and there's a surly bunch of toughs standing there and you're like, oh, that might be a potential problem, walk across the street and go down the other side. Doesn't make you less of a man, it makes you more of one. Man or woman, I guess. If you are walking down the street and someone says something off-color to you, ignore them and keep walking. I've done that many times downtown. Doesn't make you less of a man or a woman or a mature adult, it makes you more so one. Make good decisions. I've heard people say before, like, if I go down to this bar, it's kind of a dangerous place, so I make sure to carry a gun with more rounds. Well, here's a better idea. Don't go to that bar. Find a better place to spend your time. If you need more ammo to be there, then you don't need to be there. Make better decisions. And that's why I think avoiding conflict is the best thing you can do if you choose to carry. If you choose to carry, if you choose to exercise that right, then you have a huge responsibility. And one of the biggest parts of that responsibility is avoiding trouble whenever you can. Now, I'm not saying be a victim or stand by idly if something goes wrong, but don't seek out problems. And when you can see problems coming, avoid them. That's one of the most important things you can do. So there you have it. There's my top 5 things you can do to carry in a responsible manner as to mitigate as much risk as possible. I'm sure there's several other things other people would like to add because, like I said, this was just a top 5 list. If you've got other ideas you think people should adhere to while carrying, put them in the comment section below. But for now, that's my list of the top 5 things that you can do to carry a gun in a safe and responsible manner.
Oops.
It's a lady at 46 South Road. 46 South Road.
Station 1 call, retone that police. 10-4. Captain 4 to go to that location also. This is 1-9, is that correct?